Hi, my name's Tony Ridley and welcome once again to extended tutorials on crisis leadership and management as we cover off on the educational series. In this section we're talking about roles and responsibilities as they relate to specific representative council departments and individuals in ideal and superior crisis management teams that generate real world results. We've spoken about the reality that this is not location-based. Individuals can be accessible via phone, email, VoIP, video conference and so on. So it's not about the physical nature of who happens to be sitting in either a room or around a table. We're talking about the structures and the systems and the integration between all representative elements, whether they're physically present or not. We've spoken about the 7 or 8 ideal indicative disciplines and representative aspects of superior crisis management teams, from chief executive officers, human resources, finances and so on, and we've covered them in a number of other series. What we're focusing on in this particular one, we're going to be talking about security, which may be security in terms of IT, physical. They may even form part of the crisis management team or represent the crisis management team decision-making processes or the stakeholder, key holder of crisis management, business continuity plans and so on. But in particular, I've separated this from what may be business resilience compliance and or emergency crisis management because every organisation is slightly different, but there's certain aspects that need to be covered here specifically as they relate to security rather than under several of the other hats. To that end, as I've mentioned earlier, is that this may be representative of an internal resource. This could be an external stakeholder. It could be an outside counsel, consult, or someone internal to the organisation. But at a crisis decision-making level, one of the first things that they should be able to do is advise on the corporate security plans and processes. So whether you're using in-house or external resources, there should be both an understanding of the internal mechanism, risk appetite, thresholds, decision-making process, all those sorts of things internal to the organisation so it can be contextualised and more efficient relative contextual decisions can be made around both the crisis as they relate to the organisation and the crisis as they relate to the internal mechanism, culture and moral standards of the organisation. They should be able to support the teams themselves, the sub-teams, whether they're regional, international, departmental, whatever the terms of reference are, they need to be a council for a number of general management, administrative, not so much a troubleshooter, because that's both a very poor term and a very, very inexplicable definition, but the problem and consideration for security is, as was mentioned in legal, administration and a couple of the other disciplines, is that security by definition is very broad. So you simply shouldn't expect the subject matter expertise for someone who's representing security to be indicative of all things from IT to intellectual property to investigations to physical to disaster, because they are very specific skill sets, and either your representative individual or consultant or service provider may have one or more of those, but it's important to compartmentalise or be acutely aware that there are differences. Security is a very, very broad term. And they should be able to account for affected individuals. So when we're talking about any particular crisis, whether it be financial, whether it be disaster, whatever, at some stage there needs to be the guidance, understanding and accountability of the individuals. Now, whilst the implementation and the processes and systems may be reside somewhere else in the organisation, but certainly security professionals and individuals in most organisations, the priority of human life and personnel is of paramount importance. They should be the focal point, the key accountability and responsibility for affected personnel, both within the organisation, externally, whether they're shareholders, whether they're family members or other primary stakeholders. It should be their role and responsibility. They should also have the authority to activate specific resources. Now, again, they should have also been intimately involved in the planning, decision-making and construct of any crisis management plans. and this is where their understanding and their authority to activate specific resources is of vital importance. Now, again, there may be specific elements within the organisation that dictates that project management or executive management has ownership and therefore the authority to implement. However, the guidance and the feasibility as well as the priority to make those decisions should be coming from the security advisor, council, or professional representative. Support to the crisis management team processes. So again, this is where a lot of, this is again another element of a fundamental failure or a key point of failure, is that many crisis management teams and structures and systems fail in their own systems because they either are unaware of the available resources, they're unavailable of what has been prepared, they've not been practiced, rehearsed in advance. So it's important that somebody have ownership and somebody provide guidance on priority decision making, on effective meetings, on effective outcomes, the analysis of risk, the consultation of technical and administrative processes. This is a discipline, this is a skill, this is a functional requirement that sits within all crisis management teams, but certainly the stewardship agreement should sit with the security professional, or at least the security advisor, depending on the corporate structures and so on. They should also be responsible for aspects of corporate security as it sits within the organisation. So if they're responsible for vendor relationships, CCTV, physical security, kidnap and ransom, all those sorts of investigations, litigation, terrorism, civil authorities, all those sorts of things, that there's a liaison requirement or their daily charge of routine duties, then they represent that in the operational aspect of the crisis as well. And in particular, they should be able to advise on the mitigation of alternate planning, and I touched on this earlier in terms of the expertise and the experience required. It is a skill, it is an art form. It's simply not something that you either pick up from a book or you go in cold. The experience and seniority and the experience of the individual should be such that they're able to identify and encapsulate and converge all of the various disciplines, complexities, and advise decision makers who again need to be experienced and tried, and no two crises are ever the same. So whilst individuals may have experience, that is, they've been in management for 20 or 30 years and they've been all around the world, that does not constitute a precursor for success, and it certainly is not a qualifier for crisis. Some previous crisis management or crisis exposure may be irrelevant in these circumstances. Yes, they've gone through the financial crisis, but have they faced a natural disaster? Have they had a terrorist attack, kidnapping? There's so many different types of crises, and this is where the security advisor, professional, and counsel should be providing those consolidated options. There should be a methodology, there are statutes, there are disciplines, there is technical scientific processes for the outcomes, and this is where the security professional, risk management, crisis, whatever the terminology is within the organisation, should be guiding and providing. And certainly the liaison with supporting government agencies. So depending on the scale and the nature, everything from military to emergency services to government agencies of all descriptions, in emerging economies, developing countries, it may even be the military. They should have responsibility, not just during the crisis, but in their routine exposure. Once again, don't force constructs during a crisis that are extraordinary. So if this particular function is not responsible during routine circumstances, then don't force this relationship building under times of duress and crisis, because the results are pretty predictable in terms that they'll be less than ideal, possibly even catastrophic. So overall, this particular function should be a guiding leadership roles and responsibility, but still providing the technical nature and the qualification of risks as they relate to the organisations, the individuals, the business units, that should be consultative. So These certainly, and this goes the same for any of the other disciplines, whether it's legal, administrative, sales, and so on, is that they should be business enabling. So based on the evidence and the facts and the considerations, this is the business enabling advice. They shouldn't be obstructionist, prohibitive, and all of the reasons why we can't and shouldn't, and these are the reasons, the rules and regulations. No representative council, or individual or department is helpful under those circumstances, because the business needs to navigate its way to a point of success. What are the enabling? By all means, discuss and consider the constraints, freedoms of action. However, it should be business enabling in its outcome. Hence the reason this is quite broad, but there is still fundamental elements. And excluded from here is intimate knowledge of all of the plans and procedures, whether they're at a corporate, a sub-level, emergency consideration standards, all those sorts of things sits with this individual. So for those organisations that don't have, and there's still quite a lot, that don't have internal or in-house security advice or counsel, reconsider those requirements. If you can't represent or provide a higher degree of competency in all of these areas specific to security, then you already have an identifiable Achilles heel when it comes to representation for council and crisis decision making, because you simply don't have one of the fundamental cornerstones or foundation elements of crisis. So that essentially concludes this section on roles and responsibilities. We've covered all of the various sections from HR to chief executive officers to finance, sales, marketing, so on. If there's any further information, or certainly if you want access to the resources, the videos and the educational tutorials, please visit the website www.crisismanagement.tony-ridley.com for more information and videos on that subject. Once again, that's all for now. Thanks very much and goodbye.